Why .NET Rocks with Carl Franklin.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your teams move fast, deliver quality, and run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that the .NET ecosystem has to offer. The podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a software engineering firm serving companies that are struggling with past failures of business-critical software projects. They really deliver, establishing high quality, achieving rock-solid stability, and moving at the speed of your business. So when failure is not an option, ClearMeasure guarantees your project will succeed. So you can find them at clearmeasure.com. Quick announcement, my architect forums are going strong. Signups are up for the next session. And if you lead a software team, if you're a lead architect, if you're looking to collaborate with peer architect leaders, then you can just go ahead and sign up at the link in the show notes. And for those of you who are looking for my video podcast, Programming with Palermo, you can just search for it in any of the directories and you'll be able to find it. Now, I'm really excited today for my guest on the show, none other than Carl Franklin. He is the founder and co-host of .NET Rocks, the longtime podcast, and he's the executive vice president of vNext, a software development firm focused on modern methodologies and technologies. And he's a 20-plus year veteran of the software industry, and the first podcast that probably all of you developers started listening to or should listen to is .NET Rocks. And it's, numbers wise, I think it by far the most listened to podcast. It's number one in all the directories. And he's been a Microsoft MVP for developer technologies for a long time. And he's also a senior executive of Pwop Studios, a full service audio and video production and post-production studio located in Southeastern Connecticut. And he also does blazortrain.com. If you've never looked at that video series. Carl, welcome to the show. Such a pleasure to have you. How are you, sir?
I'm fine. It's a pleasure to be here. You know, I'm listening to that bio. It's unfortunate I used the word veteran because I've never shot a piece of software ever.
But you wanted to, maybe.
I wanted to blow them up, or maybe they blew up by themselves, but I don't think I've ever shot a software.
Yeah. And when you get to the 20 years, you just say 20 plus, and it's like, all right, we'll stop.
That's
counting.
enough.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jeez, I don't even know. Over. It's probably almost 30 now.
Yeah.
More than that. Yeah. Yikes.
Well,
I'm that's old guy.
That's experience. But at the same time, what is it? Every 5 to 7 years, well, for the last 20 years, the number of developers has doubled or something like that, depending on what survey you look at. So, guys like you are gold. Like the top 0.5% experience wise in our industry.
Well, I've been lucky in that, with the advent of the podcast, which started in 2002, just in case anybody was wondering. That was before the word podcast existed, I think by a couple of years. Yeah. I just started recording with Mark Dunn conversations with people in Microsoft and people like you and people who were developing back then, all about this new thing called .NET. And we didn't really know how many episodes we could possibly do, but then they just kept innovating and throwing topics at us, and it turns out that it never ends. But we were just, recording, creating MP3 files, and I was just putting them on my website, which was Franklin's Net, a training company back in the day. And, I had a mailing list and people would just download them and we just rode the wave.
Yeah. And what a wave. I learned so much early in my career. I started programming in 97, and then, 4 or 5 years later, I started listening to .NET Rocks. Well,
Yeah.
that was the advent of .NET. Before that, it was Active Server Pages.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
VB.
Yep.
So from the very beginning. And I remember, the original plug was the Internet Audio Talk Show for .NET developers.
Right. That was because we had to come up with what is this before the word podcast. And, Adam Curry and Dave Weiner made them podcasts by creating RSS feed enclosures and, hooking them up that way. I had metadata at the time in SQL Server for all of my episodes. So it was really no big deal to just sort of reformat the database and add a couple of fields and move things over and then create an active server page, an ASP.NET page to act as the feed. And that ASPX page for the feed, we used that for years and years and years and years. And then it wasn't until these services such as what we're using now, Spreaker, came around where you could host your podcast with them and they wouldn't charge you for bandwidth or anything like that. But then they had the opportunity to monetize it with ads and things like that. So those kind of platforms really helped us sort of, before they came around, we were doing everything ourselves. We were hosting in Amazon AWS and then in Azure. So it's cool to see the whole infrastructure coming of age.
Yeah.
You had
your own,
in the last 10 years.
Your own custom developed website before any of these other ones. And now if someone were to want to start a podcast today, I mean, you can do it on your smartphone, right?
You can, yeah. I wouldn't recommend it unless you have a really tight room, with not a lot of echo.
Right.
Smartphone can be good if the room is, here's the thing, right? With audio, people brag about their blue microphones or their $1,000 Neumann microphones or whatever. And then they, put it on a desk stand so that every time they touch the keyboard, boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
And then it's a real noisy room and it's cranked up. The gain is cranked up too high. You can, if you have $100 Shure SM57 in a really good sounding room, you'll have way better sound than the most expensive microphone in a crappy environment.
Yeah. Well, actually, I want to give you credit. Back in 2018, I said, hey, this DevOps thing and deploying software, I'd like to start a podcast, around that. And I mean, you gave me like all the tips, like, all right, don't make this mistake. You told me that microphone, get that microphone. Here's how to record it. Here's what you got to. So, I mean, you saved me so much heartache just from your experience and learning.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm actually putting all of the things that I know about audio and video into a video course, which I'm going to host on Vimeo. Yeah, because there's a lot to it. I mean, if you just want to do a podcast, you could probably get away with, the tips that I gave you. But, if you really want to understand audio and how it works and why you should do these things or those things, it may be some deeper stuff about phase cancellation and all that technical goo, then this is going to be a really good thing. Noise reduction, something that software kind of does, but doesn't do as well as you could do yourself.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a good course.
Speaking of that in courses, it seems like the entire time I've known you, you've always had a heart for teaching. Like you learn things, you figure it out, but then you have a heart for teaching. And like you mentioned, you're even before .NET came out, you're doing some training stuff. And .NET Rocks is all about sharing information. Yep. And even though you've done so much, and other people might be drawn to, oh, let's launch the next new system with a new startup company. And there's people who get passionate about that, but Blazor comes along and now you've done this Blazor train thing, which is all training. What is it that, draws you to training and how your mind works regarding that?
Yeah, that's a good question. At first blush, I don't know. But if I had to guess, I would say I was influenced and mentored by the best. Ethan Weiner at Crescent Software. You've heard me talk to him and about him before. But when I went to work for him right out of college, I was really struck by how they really wanted to educate their customers, because they knew that an educated customer base is one that sees the value in what they do and will therefore continue to buy their tools. So not only did they give away the source code to all their programming tools, which were originally for Quick Basic, then Basic 7, and then Visual Basic, but they commented the source code. So you could read the source code and figure out what it was. And back then, programming was like this juju dark art for most basic programmers. The stuff that they were doing was really sophisticated. So we learned a lot just by reading the comments in their tools. And they also gave these free booklets on assembly programming and things like that. So they really, really focused on teaching, and they just had a great attitude. Like Ethan's just like, you're not going to believe how cool this is, And it was just a great environment. So that stuck, that ethic really stuck with me. And, what can I say? I mean, I just love teaching. And I also wrote a couple of books. And so I got used to that idea of really preparing, written material. And in all of the classes that I did in Visual Basic and then in C# and ASP.NET, the written materials were really important, and the sample code commented, of course. So that has just carried over throughout my career.
Well, what's your view on those concepts of what makes for good teaching and good course, and how to do that, mixed with today where all the students go to the cloud first, go to YouTube first, and the notion of an accompanying workbook or document, it's like no, it's all video. How has it changed, and what hasn't changed, or what shouldn't change for effectiveness?
Well, what has changed is now text has moved off of the paper and onto the web. And, in a simple markdown, like the README file in a GitHub repo, you can illustrate, you can write, the whys, the hows, and by the way, do this. Here's the code, right? Here's a package, XML, that you can put in your CSproj file. Here's a clip of code that you can write, a class or whatever. So you can do these, and I've been doing this for a long time, these cookbooks, where here's a repo. You can just download the repo and run it. But if you want to learn how to rebuild it yourself, here are the steps and here's the why. And sometimes I don't go as deep into the why when I'm teaching something, because there's this thing called instant gratification that developers really want. And they want to see it working. And then they want to understand why it's working, right? So, and that's why places like Stack Overflow have been so popular, is because you can just, here's my problem. Problem solved. And here's a solution. Copy, paste, boom. But then if you've got half a brain, you want to look and see the explanation and why it works. Maybe it's commented, maybe it's not. Maybe they're just comments on Stack Overflow or whatever. But you want to learn why it works, because, maybe it's not quite what you need, and maybe you need to modify it. But I always have told my students, whenever you copy and paste some code or use a code generator or something like that, you really better understand what that code does. You've been given a gift, and that's fine. But you really need to understand what it does. I mean, if it's easy and you can see just without running it, great. But sometimes you need to step through it to really understand what's going on.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I could imagine younger developers, like the industry doubling the number of developers every 5 years for the last couple decades. And the younger developers turning to GitHub Copilot and saying, hey, give me some code that does this. That kind of has some elements of maybe what we used to do, is like, oh, let me go find some code on the internet. Okay, great. I think it comes from a different source, but kind of have to still believe that it's the right code to put in my software, right?
Yeah, ChatGPT is a great example of it. It can give you amazing code that would have taken you hours to find on the internet. Great.
Mm-hmm.
But it can also give you the wrong code. And that's almost better, because now you have to figure out, oh, well, this has changed. That was deprecated, blah, blah, blah. This isn't really how I want to do it. But I find that having conversations with ChatGPT about code is worthwhile.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can refine it, right? If for example, you're doing something that's completely out of your league, right? Maybe it's scientific, maybe it's mathematical, maybe it's algorithmic, and you're not getting the results you want. You can refine it with ChatGPT, and you can say, okay, well, this is good, but now I think I need blah, blah, blah. So maybe I can refactor it to do yada, yada, and it will try it. Right.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't work, and if you've come to this brick wall with ChatGPT, chances are, just by having these conversations, you'll figure it out before it does. So, I mean, I like it as a sort of a coding partner hack.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
But you can't just like copy, paste, run, ship.
Yeah. Right. If you're not properly trained on using the tools, you give a kid a sharp knife, there's going to be some blood.
That's right.
But I really like, and diving into AI like we already did with this GPT generation, I really like the software angle to it much more than the angle on social issues or politics, because in the data, in the large language model, it's only as good as the data that's been pushed into it. Right. And with code, you got a compiler, and you're looking for correctness, and there's not this body of data in the large language model where half of it is literally the opposite and opposed to the other half.
That's right.
With code and with software, it's like, well, the computer's, I mean, it's got to compile and it's got to work.
It's a reality set, right? It's a small set of data that it's more accurate, I guess you could say. It's less prone to hallucinate code.
Yeah, and then you find that out pretty quick because, the API is out of date. Oh, it doesn't work with this version of the library. So great feedback when that happens.
Yeah, and you could learn something about the history too, like how, no, I meant for a .NET Core and not .NET Framework. Oh, well, let me fix that for you.
Right. Yeah. And, man, if this was there instead of Deja News and Usenet when I was learning coding.
That's the sign of old guys right there. Usenet. What the hell is Usenet?
Usenet. That was well. I don't even. It was before my time. I don't know what was before Usenet, but I remember Google Groups acquiring Deja News as being like the genesis of Google Groups.
Yeah, Usenet, or the NNTP protocol, was just a way of. I mean, it sort of grew out of bulletin board systems, FidoNet, where you had these conversations going on that got duplicated and replicated at bulletin board systems all across the country, I suppose, and all across the world. So yeah, that's it. It was the ultimate forum, topic based, and you could just query the whole thing.
And the protocol's different, but I mean they never went away, but they're coming back more. When I look at Reddit groups, when I look at Discord servers, when I look at what Mastodon making it, it's like people kind of want to. Okay, we're going to talk about a certain topic here. Who wants in?
Yeah. And the thing I like about Mastodon too is that your server, wherever you park yourself, could have a theme, but that doesn't restrict you from talking about those things on that theme. It's just kind of like the people that you like to hang out with, right? Yeah. The posts you're going to see the most, but you can follow anybody on any Mastodon server anywhere. I really like that federated thing.
Yeah, it's. I look back and about email, and the creators of email didn't say, "Nope, you've got to sign up with my email company." It's like they created this protocol and they made the protocol available to everybody else. And I've been thinking, okay, all this social media, what company do you, and it's like this walled garden. It's like, will somebody just create the social media protocol?
Right.
so it works as naturally as email, but that hadn't happened yet.
I got an old guy story for you. So when I was researching for my book on internet programming, these protocols, one of them was SMTP.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, POP3 was for retrieving email, SMTP for sending email, and it's still used today, but it wasn't always secure. And so I remember doing a little telnet session, a little terminal session live to a group of people at VBits, I think it was back in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And, and connecting to an SMTP server. And there's this little English protocol that happens, like hello, and you put your name, hello, Carl Franklin. It says, hello, Carl Franklin, pleased to meet you. and then you say, I want to send an email. And it says, great, who is it to? And you send the to, what's the subject? And you send, it's like this text thing, right? And then whoever you say you are, it's like, okay, because it was an open relay. It was not, it had no security. And, back in those days, nobody really thought about it all that much. Somebody's going to use this to spam. And a very alert participant sitting in the front row raised his hand and he said, are you telling me that you could just say you're the president of the United States and send an email? And I'm like, yeah, isn't that cool? Me, tech guy. I was just surprised and amazed that you could do it, right? And nobody was really thinking, except this guy, Of course, the rest of the world was thinking that too. And that's why we have, SSL and all these other things in between. But at the time, it was more cool to me that you could send an email with a telnet session than it was to handle security. Yeah.
Right. Until it's like, oh, okay, somebody's abusing this. How do I solve that problem?
Yeah.
So.
Many thanks to our podcast sponsor, ClearMeasure. ClearMeasure is a software architecture company that empowers clients' development teams to be self-sufficient, moving fast, delivering quality, and running their systems with confidence. Whether starting a new project or developing new technologies or techniques, ClearMeasure sets up your team to deliver world-class results. Learn more at www.clearmeasure.com. ClearMeasure, empowering software delivery. ClearMeasure is also happy to be a sponsor of the video podcast, Programming with Palermo. Watch, learn, and program alongside Chief Architect Jeffrey Palermo. Videos are added weekly and available on syndicated locations supporting video podcast or by visiting palermo.network. Tune in today.
Well, to jump forward, .NET's been over 21 years. We hit 21 years now.
Yeah.
And, .NET 8 is out, and you're doing a lot of stuff with Blazor and blazortrain.com. But as you said, have just done so much, and there's lots of APIs and revisions coming out. It's like, okay, that's cool. That makes it a little bit easier. But from that experience, what are the big things that stand out? It's like, okay, hey, these are really cool. These are going to change part of the game. I need to look at this.
Well, the first time that we heard about Blazor was the first time I heard about Blazor was Steve Sanderson's little demo that he did. And I say little demo, but, it's awesome,
little with
amazing, life-changing demo that he did at NDC London in 2016, something like that, 2015. I can't remember exactly when. But anyway, it was the first time that anybody heard the word Blazor. And he had been doing some work on WebAssembly. And so, the whole gimmick was, hey, this is C# that runs in the browser, right? But he did that demo using the same Blazor component model that we're using today. Like it was pretty much the same, the syntax. And here's a guy who wrote Knockout, right? Which is one of the first binding frameworks for JavaScript.
Yep, SPA framework.
Right. Yeah, a SPA framework. It was one of the first, right? And, believe it or not, he kind of borrowed from WPF and Silverlight the ideas that of binding that had been floating around and
Mhm.
applied it to the web. And then he then he went to Microsoft and he rebuilt the .NET Azure portal in Knockout.
Yeah.
So he knows a few things about not only how to build these UI frameworks for the web, but how to use them as well. And I think that in doing that big project, the Azure portal, that he found all the things that he didn't like about Knockout and about how things work, and
Mhm.
just refined that and refined it and refined it. The binding model. What is the least amount of ceremony that we can use to bind with? How do we refresh pages? The state has changed, right?
Mhm.
How can we make components that we can share, as Razor class libraries, and open up a whole new market of programming tools, which, by the way, had been dead since JavaScript took over that whole space, because JavaScript tools are mostly free. They're
Mhm.
open source, all of that stuff. You could still have open source Blazor tools, but you could have the companies that were doing, still making money on Windows Forms and WPF tools now get back in the game. And they were also making JavaScript tools, but
Mhm.
they were difficult, right?
Yeah.
With this component model, they got back in the game in a big way. And so when I heard that from Steve Sanderson, that we think this will actually bring about a new market of programming tools, then, okay, well, that means ultimate reusability, not even to buy, but to use and to create for myself.
Mhm.
And that's what really piqued my interest. And man, when Blazor server was in beta, I was like, you know what? I don't understand all this stuff now, but I'm going to teach a 1-day class online with Vimeo. And I remember this exactly. I went downtown, New London, to my favorite hangout, Daddy Jack's, which has this in the summer, has this real nice little porch with tables. Poured myself a glass of wine. I was like, yeah, I think I'm going to do that. And on my phone, I set up a Vimeo class, and, with a description and the price and all that stuff. And I had a URL. And then I think I texted Scott Hunter and I said, hey, can you amp this up? And Dan Roth and blah, blah, blah. And then they posted it. And then before I knew it, I had like 25 people signed
Nice.
up. I mean, it was just like VB all over again, right? Everybody wanted to know what this was all about.
Mhm.
So over the next month, I just holed up and, dug in and figured it all out. And it was a very successful class. It was just a 1-day, like $500,
Mhm.
and it was great. And then I just kept going from there.
Well, so it's an understatement to say that, in your opinion, the most significant part of .NET, not .NET 8, but the recent versions, is the remaking of how we do URL launched applications.
Yes.
Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think that is fair to say.
We call them web applications, but that's the boundaries of what we call that are just merged. But it's kind of applications you don't have to pre-deploy. You just launch them from a URL.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's pretty cool. I mean, the stuff that they did in Blazor for .NET 8 really made the Blazor web app template the sort of go-to ASP.NET Core app. Before we had MVC, I know that you got in MVC very early because we talked about it on .NET Rocks. And, everybody else was kind of scratching their head going, what is this pattern? How... Yeah, it's kind of weird, but we got it. And then MVC, wildly popular, statically rendered sites, right? Server-side rendering. It just made it easier. But the whole model is, unlike, an Ajax framework or something like that, you make a request and then the response gets munged together with code on the background in the back end. And then the whole HTML page updates and gets sent back to the user, right? And with the advent of Ajax and all of that stuff, which is asynchronous JavaScript and XML, you could make a call to an API endpoint and then take the results of that and just update a piece of the DOM. The problem is it takes like 6 functions to do one thing, right? One to make a call, one to receive the call, one to update. It adds up. And so you end up managing a lot of JavaScript. So that's when these frameworks started coming around that we do, rather than just replace the whole page, we do like this update things and bind to things. And that's where Knockout came in, and Angular and, React and Vue and all those frameworks. And Blazor, I think the Blazor component model, forget about the fact that it can run in the browser. That's just bonus. The Blazor component model is the best binding, framework there is. It's just so clean, and you can thank Steve Sanderson for that. So I think that the Blazor web app in .NET 8, what they did is really smart. They said, okay, you don't have to use interaction anywhere. You can do the static server-side rendering just like you could in MVC with this new component model, which makes it easier to compartmentalize and to reuse and all that stuff. And that's fine. You don't have to use interactivity. But when you want to, instead of reaching for JavaScript, you got C#. It can run on the server or it can run in the browser. So you get the best of both worlds. You get the static server-side rendered content all day long that MVC gave you. And you also get this really cool modern interactivity.
Yeah. I was thinking about when blogging became kind of really popular before microblogging, before Twitter and whatnot. And the dot text and the DOS blog open source projects to put up your own blog website,
Clemens Fasters.
Right. It's all statically right. It's all statically rendered. And even the community server but it's all statically rendered. But what was missing with Blazor initially was just being able to do regular old content websites.
Right.
You could do it, but it's not the best to get, indexed by the search engines and people just like popping on real quick and going away. And now they kind of brought it full circle, and
they combined
any
everything.
type you're covered.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if you start with an interactive site, you can still pre-render, and pre-rendering is sort of there by default. So your first page, if there's no interactivity on the page, your first page is statically rendered, which it should be, by the way. Yeah.
We're so used to the JavaScript frameworks and even Facebook and all these where, oh, my page load. Oh, wait a minute. It's just the animated gray blocks. I still got to wait.
Right, exactly. And believe it or not, you can produce all the gray blocks you want to with Blazor too. If that's your thing. The streaming rendering allows you to do a static page first, and then as data comes in, it can just stream to its locations wherever you put it.
Yeah. Now you've jumped onto this, and I got to believe that some part of it, you kind of seeing how architecturally it's changing, is colored by your overall experience and going and doing so much desktop software where it's all in memory, all interactive. And, we've had 15 years where I would say the majority of software, the majority of code slingers out there are doing some type of web in the browser only. Right. And we have this, huge generation of programmers that hasn't gone deep on client applications, and the SPA applications are kind of like the foray. But are there any certain patterns or things that you lit up that said, wait a minute, we used to do this in VB, we used to do this in WinForms, and now that I have a stateful application that's resident in memory, these same patterns apply. We need to bring them in.
Well, that's obviously what attracted me to Blazor in the first place, was the statefulness of it, and it was very much like programming Windows Forms or WPF or desktop applications or even mobile applications for that matter, in that, you load up and you have a certain amount of memory that's all yours.
Mm-hmm.
And you can create these state bags and move them outside of your pages so that you can access them anywhere and they can update the UI. There's no iNotify property changed, however, right? You can still do that if you want, but you don't need to.
Mm-hmm.
There's an event mechanism called EventCallback, which just totally simplifies events in the Blazor programming model. You don't need to implement iDisposable to unhook an event handler, right? All that's done for you. So the ceremony has been taken away. And I just love that. That's just like the best part about it is, okay, this is really cool for this stateful programming model. But on top of that, they made it easier for even from Windows Forms or WPF. The whole programming model is easier to use.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you've done so much. What do you think, or what is the next 5 years? And you can go further than that if you want. What does the next 5 years for Carl Franklin look like, do you think?
I think I'm going to be making a lot of money on updating people's web projects. It's already started. I mean, people are coming to me with, I've got a web forms project or I've got an old Blazor project that I need to update and upgrade. And so that has been my sort of focus ever since the first release candidate of .NET 8 came out anyway. It's been my focus on how to do upgrades. And I just completed my first one successfully for a customer that had a Blazor 6, .NET 6 Blazor server application.
Mm-hmm.
And we updated it to a Blazor 8. I call it Blazor 8, but Blazor
Sure.
.NET 8 server application.
Nice.
Yeah. So there's some things to watch out for. That's for sure.
Yeah. Even though it's new, there's a lot of Blazor applications out there already.
Yeah.
It's not that new anymore now.
Right. Yeah.
Well, nice.
I'm also focused on upgrading my workshops and, my training material to .NET 8. I get about halfway through it so far. Some topics I totally took out because you don't need to cover them anymore. And some I've added in, but it's always fun just changing and with the times and modifying the stuff that you have and trying to think of how best to present it and in what order, those things.
Yeah. Yeah. .NET rocks. Going to go on for a couple more decades.
Sure. Why not? I mean, there's so much stuff to talk about. At this point, it's kind of a hobby,
Yeah.
We've been doing it for so long, and we went through this golden period where advertising was sort of really good, because we were the only game in town.
Mm-hmm.
And then, what happens is, of course, everybody and their brother does a podcast. There's a lot more material to listen to now. But, we're like the grandpas of .NET, Richard and me.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And like you mentioned, there's so many more podcasts, but there's exponentially more listeners. I mean,
yeah.
I don't know the answer to this question. I'm guessing in the time when there's so many more podcasts coming around, did your listenership ever go down because of competition?
No, but it went down because of COVID.
Yeah.
And the main idea there is that people aren't commuting as much anymore. So a whole bunch of our listenership of our listeners who were commuting stopped listening because they don't have that commute anymore, or they listen less frequently,
Yeah.
The first thing you do when you get up in the morning and go to your office at home isn't listen to .NET Rocks, usually.
Yeah. But,
it's, oh my God, what did I miss?
I've done it while walking through the aisles of grocery store.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Washing the dishes, doing chores, mowing the lawn. I mean, podcasts go everywhere. That's what I love about them.
Right.
Yeah.
And now the headsets and the wireless buds and things are so awesome. You just kind of you don't even notice. It's not like the Walkman.
I seldom go shopping without listening to podcasts.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
Well, we kind of plugged, Blazor training. I'll include those links in the show notes. Is there anything else that listeners need to, you want to tee them up to?
Yes.
Awesome.
I've teamed up with Jeff Fritz from Microsoft, who's like the Blazor evangelist at Microsoft, to do this new show called the Blazor Puzzle.
Ooh.
BlazorPuzzle.com. And it's the same kind of website that I have for Blazor Train and the .NET show. I sort of settled on this sort of tile-based thing where you just see the tiles with graphics, and then you click on them, you go to YouTube. Mm-hmm. It's actually much easier than trying to navigate YouTube and figure out what, where the next thing is. I don't think YouTube's very good about that. If, for example, you land on episode 10 in YouTube, good luck finding 1 through 9.
Right.
The
next video will be of a cat.
Yeah. Even worse if the content creator doesn't put everything into a playlist, but
right,
or whatever they call it. But anyway, so Blazor Puzzle, I don't know if you ever listened to this show on NPR called Car Talk. But it was one of it,
but no.
Yeah, it was one of the inspirations behind .NET Rocks, and one of the reasons that I liked getting into talk radio, for lack of a better word, is these two guys, mechanical engineers who went to MIT, and they set up a garage, brothers, a garage in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and some producer, got his car fixed there and said, hey, there's this open slot on Thursday nights or whatever at Boston University. Why don't you do a call-in show for cars? And these guys are so much fun. They like kid each other and laugh the whole time, and they're making cracking jokes, and and of course there is nutritional value too, right? People call in and they have, but it's fun, so it's making a noise. Well, can you do the noise? These Italian guys. And they're like, yeah, it's like, oh, I know what that is. So it's a lot of fun, right? But they always did this thing called the Puzzler. And I say always, sometimes they didn't. They went on vacation in the summer. But
yeah.
Every episode, let's say, has this Puzzler. And the Puzzler is some puzzle to be solved. Why doesn't this work? What's going on here? What happened when the guy got out and opened the hood and then slammed it after 3 minutes and it worked? So first they talk about last week's Puzzler, and they give the answer, and they pick a winner from people who called in or wrote in with the right answer, and they send them some coffee mug or some useless piece of crap. And they did the next Puzzler later in the show, and give the address for people to write it on a postcard or whatever. Write on a postcard, write it on the back of a $20 bill. No fruit. Somebody etched it into a piece of fruit. Don't do that. It's just a lot of fun. And I figured, Blazor is one of those things where you kind of have to learn by osmosis, by listening to people talk. I mean, there's so much content at blazortrain.com now, 101 episodes.
Yeah.
That it's daunting to sit down and go through it piece by piece. Maybe I could just start playing with it and, learn a couple of things every week with these short episodes, like 10 minutes long, and have some fun at the same time. And maybe I'll win a mug.
There you go. And actually yesterday I was kind of rearranging my coffee mugs, and I got the .NET Rocks mug right there in the front row.
Nice.
I think it was the Rory, Blythe, and Carl version.
Yeah.
So, well, awesome. We'll make sure to include blazorpuzzle.com in there. Any conferences or anything else we want to make sure not to miss before we wrap up?
Doing DevSum in Stockholm in May. Probably going back to Dev Intersection in Vegas. Another NDC somewhere, I'm sure. But I'm not going to London, and I'm not going to Sydney. So Porto, perhaps, Minnesota, wherever they go, I'll probably be there.
Whew, that's still a lot of travel.
Yeah, it's fun.
Nice. Very cool. Well, awesome. But
how about you? Are you going to do any conferences?
Yes, actually, that conference in Round Rock, North Austin. So from Wisconsin, keeping the Texas thing going. And I'm going to be facilitating the open space section at that conference.
Wow.
So that'll be fun. And it'll be after lunch each day. And, it's self-directed. If you've never done an open space, you go in there and either say, hey, I want to talk to somebody about this, or I've got something to share about this. Right. And people just like put their ticks up. The agenda is self-building. And then what you go in, whatever happens is the only thing that could have happened. And there's lots of great conversations that happen that you could never have pre-scheduled ahead of time.
It's really a great protocol for gathering together impromptu talks and discussions, and some of the best discussions happen that way. Yeah, I don't know if people know this that listen to your show, but for years you hosted a party at Microsoft Tech Ed or PDC or whatever, Build or whatever the Microsoft conference was called, Party with Palermo. Do you talk about that much on your show?
I probably should talk about it more than maybe it's just the last few years.
Parties.
Yeah. So we started in 2006. Yeah. 2006 was the first one. I remember Tech Ed Orlando, and social media was the blog sites. I think my blog was on .netjunkies.com at the time, or codebetter.com. And I just put out the word, said, hey, who's going? And we tried to cobble together and just said, hey, look, let's meet somewhere. You're coming in the night before the conference. It's always dead. Everybody's searching for who's here. And so I put out the word, hey, the Peabody Hotel. And I called the restaurant and I asked them, and they said, oh, reservation for how many? Well, not exactly a reservation, but people might show up. Is that okay? And so, and I put out the word, and then I remember Daryl Norton said, you got to give it a name. You can't just be go here. You got to give it a name, like call it a party. I'm like, nah, we're just getting together. He's like, you know what? This is Party with Palermo. Call it Party with Palermo. And so I'm like, okay, sure, whatever. Yeah. And so I did that, and we had 35 people just show up. Daryl Norton was there. Michelle Leroux Bustamante was there. Javal Lowy was there. And
but then, you also got like the Microsoft people that were there, or like it was like the what was that disco thing in the 70s? Studio 54. It was the Studio 54 without the cocaine of of .net. Like the who's who showed up at Party with Palermo. It was great.
But there was some scotch, I think.
Oh yeah.
So and no, I still do it. I basically, any of the major conferences that I go to, I'll do it. So I've done it at lots of tech eds and builds, and like if I'm going, I'll put out the word and I'll set up a venue. I've gone way too far in getting sponsorships, but I'm not an event planner, so it's just a fun thing. And so I do it at the MVP Summit every year. So we started it again, and I'll keep that going because it's just kind of fun. And as long we put out the word, get enough companies that want to sponsor, put their logo up, give an announcement, generate some money to fund the bar tab, we'll keep it going.
That's it. It's good stuff. Yeah, I miss those days. I haven't been to an MVP summit in a while, mostly because, I really don't feel like I can afford to take the time for a party. But then again, and I see a lot of my fellow MVPs at different conferences during the year, so it's not like I'm isolated. It's just kind of, I don't know. It is what it is. Sometimes it's a scheduling thing, and sometimes it's just like, do I really want to like hop on a plane and go somewhere for a week for a party?
Well, you're doing so much other travel, and you have, your normal schedule is like making the rounds, visiting with so many people anyway. Whereas there's lots of people says, I haven't seen anybody in a year. I'm like, well, that's a problem. But they go and it's awesome.
Well, I might go to the next one. We'll see.
Yeah.
It just depends on what I'm doing.
All right. Well, we'll wrap this one up, and man, this is so much fun, Cara. I appreciate you coming on, and we 20 years, September of 03 is when we first talked. So we're right at 20 years.
You called from Iraq. Sorry.
I did. Yeah.
You called from Iraq. You were out there setting up a local area network for your buddies in your battalion.
deployed with the Army, and I was able to find one of those AT&T call centers that just like popped up in a tent that had a little internet connection that was good enough for Skype.
Yeah.
So
that was amazing.
I might have used a landline for that. I can't remember, but either way, I was on the sand.
It was pretty cool.
So yeah, when you did live .NET Rock shows and did callers.
Did. That's back when we mattered.
But, well, I mean, how many more times grown is the listenership?
Who knows?
Yeah,
who knows?
You could do it if you wanted to.
We had our spotlight there for quite a few years, and because nobody else was doing it, and that, that was enough. It was fun.
Yep.
It's still fun. I still like talking to people.
Let me say out loud, for the 1 or 2 listeners out there that have not listened to .NET Rocks, we'll include a link in the show notes. Pretty easy to find. Go give it a listen.
Almost 1,900 episodes now.
Yeah. Every topic under the sun. So
right. The first 50 are with me and Mark Dunn. 50 to 100 are with me and Rory Blythe. And Richard came on as co-host at episode 100, and it just went to a whole new level. So those episodes 50 to 100, I think, are when you came on. And the format was 2 hours instead of 1, and we did some comedy, and we did some music. It was kind of like the variety show.
Yeah, all kinds of
And then we got serious again at 100.
Well, if you're thinking about ancestry, then you can tack on 277 more episodes, because this podcast really wouldn't have gotten started like it did without your assistance and advice. So
that's nice to say.
Take the credit for that.
Okay.
All right. Well,
thanks, Jeff.
You're a humble man. But thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. I know you got lots of other things going on. You're doing tons of training, but this was a blast. Appreciate it.
It was fun. It was good catching up with you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. And dear listener, until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.